The ship was dying and Park knew it. Red lights flashed across every screen in the research vessel. Alarms screamed through the metal corridors. The floor shook so hard that fell twice before she reached the escape pod bay. Behind her, she could hear the engine making sounds that engines should never make, a deep groaning, like a wounded animal taking its last breaths. All crew to escape pods, the ship's computer announced in its calm, almost bored voice. Hull breach in sections 4 through 7, engine failure imminent, all crew to escape pods. Was already running. She was a scientist who studied alien life forms. She had spent 3 years aboard traveling to distant moons and planets, cataloging creatures that no human had ever seen before. She was good at her job. She was not good at emergencies. The escape pod bay was chaos. Crew members pushed and shoved, trying to reach the remaining pods. Saw her friend Minu disappear into one pod, saw Captain Sira climb into another. She ran toward the last pod on the left side of the bay, her boots slipping on the metal floor. She made it inside just as the broke apart. The pod's automatic systems took over. Straps wrapped around her body, holding her tight against the seat. A thick door slammed shut. And then she was falling, spinning, tumbling through space toward the green and brown moon below. 7. She remembered the briefing about this place. The Galactic Union had classified it as a Class 5. That meant it was one of the most dangerous places in the known galaxy. The plants were poisonous. The water was acidic in some regions. And the animals were nightmares given flesh and fur. The escape pod hit the atmosphere and began to burn, closed her eyes and prayed to gods she did not believe in. The pod shook and rattled and screamed through the sky. She could see nothing through the small window except fire and smoke. Then the trees came. The pod crashed through the canopy of an ancient forest. Branches as thick as her body snapped against the hull. The sound was like thunder, like war, like the end of the world. His head slammed against the seat despite the straps, and for a moment everything went black. When she woke, the pod was still, silent. The only sound was her own breathing and the distant calls of alien birds. Touched her forehead and found blood. Not too much. She would live. She checked her arms, her legs, her ribs. Everything hurt, but nothing was broken. She had been lucky. She opened the pod's door and stepped out into a new world. The forest was beautiful in a terrifying way. The trees rose so high that she could not see their tops. Their bark was dark red, almost black, and their leaves were silver and gold. Strange flowers grew from the ground, glowing with soft blue light. The air smelled like rain and honey and something else, something sharp and wild that made the hair on her arms stand up. Went back into the pod and gathered what she could find. With bandages and medicine. Emergency food rations enough for 3 days if she was careful. A water purifier that could make almost any liquid safe to drink. A knife with a blade that never went dull. A small communication beacon, damaged but maybe fixable. She checked the beacon twice. The screen was cracked, the antenna was bent, but the core system still worked. If she could find the right materials, she could repair it. She could call for help. She could get off this moon. But that would take time, weeks maybe, and she had to survive until then. Built a small fire as the sun began to set. The wood of the red-barked trees burned well, giving off warmth and a pleasant smell. She ate half of a food ration bar and drank water from a nearby stream after running it through her purifier. She told herself that everything would be fine. She was trained for this. She was a scientist. She knew how to observe, how to adapt, how to survive. The night fell and the sounds began. They started as distant calls, low and rumbling like stones rolling down a mountain. Sat very still by her fire, listening. The calls moved closer. They came from the left, then the right, then behind her. Something was circling her position. Something big. Something that hunted in groups. She remembered the briefing again. 7 was home to many dangerous creatures, but one species stood above all others. She had seen pictures of them in the research files. 3 meters tall when standing on their back legs. 4 legs for running, but they could walk on 2 when they wanted. Covered in fur as black as space between the stars. Eyes like burning amber. Claws that could cut through starship hull plating like paper. The Galactic Union had classified these as non-sapient animals, not people. Smart animals, yes. Pack hunters with complex social structures, but not intelligent in the way that mattered. Not capable of language or culture or art. The briefing had also mentioned one other detail. No human had ever encountered and lived to tell about it. Picked up her knife. It felt very small in her hand. The calls grew louder, closer. She could hear movement in the darkness beyond her fire's light, heavy bodies pushing through undergrowth, branches cracking under massive weight. She counted at least 4 distinct voices, maybe more. She thought about running, but running from predators was usually the worst thing prey could do. It triggered their hunting instincts. It turned a standoff into a chase, and she had no doubt that they could catch her before she took 10 steps. So she stayed by her fire, she held her knife, and she waited. The first emerged from the shadows, like a ghost made of darkness and muscle. It was larger than the pictures had suggested, much larger. Its head alone was bigger than its entire body. Its amber eyes reflected the firelight, making them look like twin suns burning in the night. It opened its mouth slightly, revealing teeth that curved like swords. Its heart beat so fast that she thought it might explode. More appeared behind the first one. She counted 6 in total, a full hunting pack. They spread out around her camp, surrounding her completely. She could not run now even if she wanted to. The largest, the one who had appeared first, took a step toward her, then another. Its eyes never left her face. Understood then that she had 2 choices. She could die as prey, screaming, running, begging, or she could die as something else, something that the had maybe never seen before. She stood up slowly. Her legs shook, but she forced them to hold her weight. She looked at the massive predator walking toward her. She met its amber eyes directly. And she refused to look away. The stopped walking, its head tilted slightly to one side, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Around the clearing, the other pack members went very still. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Human, and stared at each other across the flickering firelight. The night stretched on. His legs ached. Her eyes burned from not blinking. But she did not look away. She did not run. She did not scream. She stood her ground against 6 apex predators in the darkness of an alien forest, armed with nothing but a knife and pure human stubbornness. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. Dawn came slowly to the forest of 7, painting the silver leaves gold and the sky a pale purple. Park had not moved from her spot by the dead fire. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she had not looked away from the massive standing before her. 4 hours. She had been staring at this creature for 4 hours. The had not moved either. It sat on its haunches now, its amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that she could not name. It was the largest of the pack, the leader, she guessed. She had started calling him in her mind because the 3 pale scars across his muzzle reminded her of her grandfather's hands from years of hard work. His pack waited in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. They had not attacked. They had not left. They simply watched, patient as mountains, as their leader and this strange, furless creature continued their silent contest. Did not understand what was happening. Every piece of scientific knowledge she had told her she should be dead by now. There were predators. She was alone, wounded, weak. She was food. There was no logical reason for them to wait. But something in her gut told her not to break eye contact. Something old and deep. Something that came from the part of her brain that remembered when humans were prey on a dangerous planet called Earth. That ancient instinct whispered to her, hold your ground. Show no fear. Make them see you as something other than meat. So she held her ground. She showed no fear, even though fear was all she felt, and she stared into his burning amber eyes until the world narrowed to nothing but the two of them. When the sun was fully up and the forest birds were singing their morning songs, blinked. It was a slow blink, like a cat settling down for a nap. Then the great predator turned his head away from and looked at his pack. He made a low sound, something between a growl and a hum. The other responded with similar sounds. Then lay down on the ground, resting his massive head on his front paws. Sneeze finally gave out. She sat down hard, her whole body shaking. She did not know what had just happened. She did not know if she had won something or simply delayed her death. But she was still alive. After spending a night surrounded by the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, she was still alive. They did not leave. They stayed at the edges of the clearing, watching her with their amber eyes. But they did not attack. Something had changed during that long night. Something had shifted in the relationship between predator and prey. Knew she should be afraid. She should try to run while they were calm. She should find a cave or climb a tree or do something to get away from these creatures. But exhaustion was pulling at her like heavy chains, and her scientific mind was burning with questions. Why had they not killed her? What had her starring contest with meant to them? The Galactic Union said they were non-sapient, but could animals really have such complex social rituals? She decided to test something. Moving very slowly, keeping her movements calm and visible, began to gather materials for a proper shelter. She found long branches that had fallen from the red-barked trees. She collected large leaves from bushes near the stream. She worked steadily, building a simple lean-to structure against a rock wall at one end of the clearing. They watched everything she did. One of them, a smaller female with a scar running down her left side, moved closer to observe. Froze when she approached, but the female did not attack. She simply sat down about 10 meters away and watched work with what looked almost like curiosity. Called her because she reminded of a curious younger sister, always wanting to know how things worked. When picked up a long branch and stripped its smaller twigs away, picked up a similar branch in her mouth and shook it. The twigs fell off. She dropped the branch and looked at, making a soft questioning sound. His heart stopped. That was imitation. That was learning by observation. That was something only sapient creatures were supposed to do. She picked up another branch and stripped it more slowly, letting watch each movement. The young found another branch in her, using her claws this time instead of her mouth. The result was rough, but it worked. Wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She wanted to write 100 research papers about what she was seeing. The Galactic Union was wrong. They were not mindless animals. They were thinking, learning, curious beings who had simply never been understood. Over the next several days, continued building her camp while they continued watching. She finished her shelter and made it waterproof with layers of broad leaves. She built a fire pit lined with stones. She found a berry bush that her scanner said was safe to eat and started gathering food to supplement her rations. Followed her almost everywhere, always keeping a respectful distance but clearly fascinated by everything did. The young watched her use the water purifier. She watched her tend to the cut on her forehead with medicine from the. She watched her work on the broken communication beacon, sorting through its damaged parts. Watched too, though from farther away. The alpha male spent most of his time resting or coordinating with the other pack members, but his amber eyes often found across the clearing. There was no hostility in his gaze anymore. There was something else, something she could not quite name. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. The other four kept their distance, but they no longer seemed threatening. They went about their own lives, hunting, sleeping, grooming each other's thick black fur, and simply accepted its presence among them. 2 weeks passed, his wound healed, her shelter grew stronger, her understanding of the grew deeper. She learned that they communicated with a complex system of sounds, body movements, and scent. She learned that was not just the strongest. He was also the often settling disputes between pack members with calm authority. She learned that was young, probably equivalent to a human teenager, and that her curiosity sometimes annoyed the older members of the pack. She also learned that something was wrong. The pack was smaller than it should be. From what she had read, packs usually had 8 to 12 members, but this one only had 6 adults. They often made sad, lonely sounds at night, and they kept returning to a specific part of the forest, a place hidden behind a waterfall where they would stay for hours before coming back looking exhausted and worried. Wanted to follow them, but she knew it would be dangerous. They had accepted her presence in the clearing, but that did not mean they would welcome her in their private spaces. But then one evening, everything changed. She was sitting by her fire, eating berries and dried meat, when approached closer than she ever had before. The young made a series of sounds, urgent, pleading sounds that made his chest tight with emotion, then turned and walked toward the forest, looking back at with those amber eyes. She was asking her to follow. Stood up. She did not know what waited in the darkness of the forest. She did not know if this was a trap or a test or something else entirely. But she had spent weeks earning the trust of these creatures, and she was not going to throw that away now. She followed into the night. The path wound through dense undergrowth and over fallen trees. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, clicking insects, calling birds, the distant rush of water. Moved quickly but kept checking to make sure was keeping up. Finally, they reached the waterfall. Behind the curtain of falling water, could see the dark opening of a cave. Pushed through the water and disappeared into the darkness. Took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to the universe and followed. What she found inside would change everything. The cave behind the waterfall was larger than expected. It stretched deep into the rock, with smooth walls that had been worn by centuries of water and claw. Soft blue moss grew on the ceiling, giving off a gentle glow that let her see without a torch. The smell hit her first, the thick, musky scent of mixed with something else, something that made her scientist's mind snap to attention. Sickness, she could smell sickness. Led her deeper into the cave, past narrow passages and wide chambers, until they reached a small hollow near the back. There, huddled together on a bed of dried leaves and soft grass, were 4 cubs. His breath caught in her throat. They were small, each one about the size of a large dog. Their fur was fluffy and soft, not sleek like the adults. Their eyes were closed, their breathing shallow and weak. They looked thin, far too thin, their ribs visible under their dark fur. One of the cubs was smaller than the others, with silver tips on her fur that caught the moss light like tiny stars. She was the weakest of the 4, lying apart from her siblings with her legs tucked under her body. Could see each breath she took was an effort. Made a soft, sad sound and nudged toward the cubs. Understanding flooded through like cold water. The pack had not been visiting this cave to rest. They had been coming here to care for these orphaned cubs. That was why there were only 6 adults. Someone was missing. The mother. She looked then at the cubs, then back at. The young's eyes held something that needed no translation. Please, help them, we do not know how. Knelt beside the cubs slowly, making no sudden movements. Up close, she could see the signs of neglect more clearly. The cubs had not been abused, the adults clearly loved them. But adults were hunters built for chasing and killing. They were not built for the gentle, constant care that newborns needed. Without their mother, the cubs were starving. The weakest one, the little female with silver-tipped fur, opened her eyes. They were amber like all eyes, but lighter, more golden. She looked without fear, too weak and young to understand that she should be afraid of this strange creature. Made a decision. She went back to her camp and gathered everything she needed. The watched her go but did not try to stop her. When she returned to the cave with her arms full of supplies, Even was waiting outside the entrance, his massive head tilted with what looked like hope. For the next 12 hours, worked without rest. She used her scanner to check each cub's health. They were dehydrated and malnourished, but not sick with disease. They simply needed food, proper food, soft food, food that their young teeth and stomachs could handle. The adult had been bringing them meat from their hunts, but the meat was too tough. The cubs could not chew it properly. They could not digest it. They were eating, but they were not getting nutrition. Took the meat that the adults had left in the cave and began to prepare it differently. She cut it into tiny pieces with her knife. She boiled it in water heated by a small fire, making it soft and tender. She mashed it into a paste that even the weakest cub could swallow. Then she began to feed them. The first 3 cubs ate hungrily, making small happy sounds as spooned the warm meat paste into their mouths. They were weak, but not as far gone as their sister. After eating, they curled up together and fell into a deep sleep, their small chests rising and falling with stronger breaths. The 4th cub, the silver-tipped one, was harder. She was so weak that she could barely open her mouth, had to drip the food between her lips little by little, waiting after each drop to make sure she swallowed. Hours passed. The blue moss light stayed constant, but knew that day had become night and night had become day again outside the cave. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She focused only on the small, fragile life in her hands. Sometime during those long hours, entered the cave. The alpha male was too large to fit comfortably in the small hollow, but he squeezed in anyway. He lay down on the opposite side of the cubs, close enough to touch but careful not to disturb work. His amber eyes watched everything she did with fierce attention. Looked at him, he looked at her. An understanding passed between them deeper than words. "You are trying to save them," his gaze seemed to say. "You are trying to save our children." "Yes," she answered with her eyes, "I am trying. I will not stop trying." Made a low sound, soft and warm. Then he pressed his massive head against his shoulder. It was a gesture she recognized from her studies of earth wolves, a sign of acceptance, of trust, of pack. She had to blink back tears as she continued feeding the silver-tipped cub. By the second morning, all 4 cubs were out of danger. They were still weak, still thin, but they were eating well and sleeping deeply, and making the small sounds that healthy cubs were supposed to make. Named the silver-tipped one, because she was small and delicate like a flower but fighting hard to survive. The other 3 she named Miso, and names that felt warm and right in her mouth. When she finally left the cave to get more supplies, the entire pack was waiting outside the waterfall. All 6 adults sat in a circle, their amber eyes fixed on her. For a moment, felt fear again. What if they were angry that she had entered their sacred place? What if they thought she had done something wrong? But then approached and pressed her head against his chest, making a sound like purring mixed with humming. One by one, the other adults did the same. Even rose and touched his muzzle to her hair in a gesture so gentle that it made her heart ache. She understood. She had passed another test, not a test of strength or courage this time, but a test of something else. Compassion, care, the willingness to sacrifice her own comfort for the sake of others. In the eyes of she had become something more than a strange creature to be watched. She had become someone to be trusted, someone to be valued, someone who belonged. Over the following weeks, divided her time between her camp in the clearing and the cave behind the waterfall. She prepared food for the cubs every day, slowly adding solid pieces as they grew stronger. She played with them when they had energy to play. She held them when they were scared of thunder or strange sounds. Became her shadow. The silver-tipped cub followed everywhere she went. When sat by the fire, curled up at her feet. When walked to the stream, walked beside her. When slept in her shelter, somehow squeezed through the opening and pressed her small, warm body against the side. The other cubs grew attached to her too, but not with the same intensity. They loved her, yes, but needed her in a way that went beyond love. Tu was not just a caretaker. She was home. discovered what that meant one evening when her damaged translation software finally cracked the language. She had been recording their sounds for weeks, feeding the data into her equipment, hopping to find patterns. When the software finally produced results, she sat staring at the screen for a long time. The sound that made whenever came near, that happy, desperate, relieved sound, was a word. And the word meant something beautiful. It meant the one who makes this place safe. It meant the one who brought warmth when there was cold. It meant the one who turned emptiness into home. The cubs had given a name, and as she sat in the clearing with sleeping in her lap, listening to the soft sounds of the pack settling down for the night, she realized something. She did not want to leave anymore. The communication beacon sat in her shelter, still broken, still waiting to be repaired. She had all the parts she needed. She had the knowledge and the tools. She could call for rescue anytime she wanted. But for the first time since crashing on this deadly moon, Park was not sure she wanted to be rescued. 6 months had passed since Park crashed on 7, and she barely recognized her own life anymore. Her shelter had grown from a simple lean-to into something that almost looked like a home. She had added walls made of woven branches and a proper roof that kept out the rain. She had built a storage area for food and supplies, a small table for working on her equipment, and a sleeping corner lined with soft moss and dried grass. The cubs had helped her gather materials, treating the whole process like a game. Her days had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. She woke before dawn, when the forest was quiet and cool. She prepared breakfast for herself and the cubs. She had learned to cook many things from the local plants and animals that her scanner said were safe. Then she spent the morning foraging or improving her camp while the cubs played nearby. In the afternoons, she explored the forest with as her guide. The young showed her hidden streams with clean water, caves with useful minerals, and groves where the best berries grew. Recorded everything in her notes, building a database of knowledge about this world that no human had ever gathered before. In the evenings, she sat by her fire and watched the cubs grow. They were so different now from the weak, starving bobbies she had found in the cave. Miso had become the largest of the four, already showing signs of the strength that would make him a powerful adult. Was clever and quick, always figuring out puzzles and problems before her siblings. Was calm and watchful, often sitting apart from the games to observe with thoughtful eyes. And was still small, still delicate, but she burned with a fierce spirit that made proud. The silver-tipped cub had survived when she should have died, and she seemed determined to make the most of every moment of her life. She still slept curled around's feet every night. She still made that special sound whenever returned from anywhere. And she had started trying to imitate human behaviors, sitting on her back legs, tilting her head when listening, even attempting to make sounds that were almost like words. The adult had changed too. Still led the pack with quiet authority, but he now included in his decisions. When the pack needed to move to follow prey, he would come to her camp first and make a specific sound, a question, asking if she could travel today. When disputes arose between pack members, he sometimes looked at her for her reaction before making a judgment. Had become like a younger sister too. They spent hours together exploring and communicating. The young was learning to understand human gestures and expressions, and was learning to read the subtle movements of ears and tails. They could not speak the same language, but they understood each other more with each passing day. The other adults, 2 males and 2 females whose names had learned through careful observation, treated her with respect and warmth. They brought her gifts sometimes, interesting stones, beautiful feathers, fruits they thought she might like. They groomed her hair when she sat still long enough, their huge claws impossibly gentle against her scalp. She was pack now, truly pack, not a visitor, not a curiosity, but a member of their family. This thought made her happy and sad at the same time. The communication beacon sat in the corner of her shelter, fully repaired. She had fixed it 2 months ago. She could press a single button and send a signal that would bring rescue ships within days. She could go home to human space, to her colleagues, to hot showers and real food and people who spoke her language. But every time she reached for that button, would make her special sound, or would poke her head into the shelter with some new discovery, or would rumble a greeting from across the clearing, and would pull her hand back and tell herself that tomorrow would be a better day to call for help. Tomorrow never came. One night, as she sat by the fire with all 4 cubs piled around her, she started to sing. She had not sung since the crash. She had not even thought about music. Survival had consumed all her attention. But that night, under the strange stars of 7, with warm cubs breathing softly against her legs, a song rose up from somewhere deep inside her. It was a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, simple words about mountains and rivers and a child going to sleep. Sang it quietly, almost to herself, not expecting anyone to care. But the cubs went very still, their ears turned toward her, their amber eyes grew wide with wonder. When she finished, made a sound, not her usual happy sound, but something new, something that sounded almost like she was trying to hum along. Sang the song again. This time, all 4 cubs joined in with their own sounds, creating a strange and beautiful harmony that echoed through the forest. The adult gathered at the edge of the firelight, listening. Even came close, his massive body settling down just a few meters away. His amber eyes held something had never seen in them before, something soft, something moved, something that looked almost like tears would look if could cry. After that night, singing became part of their routine. Sang in the evenings while the cubs ate dinner. She sang in the mornings to wake them gently. She sang during storms when thunder scared the younger ones, and she sang during celebrations when a hunt went well. She taught the cubs all the songs she knew, lullabies, folk songs, even a few popular songs from human space that made them tilt their heads in confusion at the strange rhythms. The cubs began singing back. Not in words, of course. Mouths could not make human sounds, but they created their own versions of the songs, using their growls and hums and purrs to build melodies that echoed the ones taught them. The cave behind the waterfall became filled with music, human and voices blending together in ways that had never happened before in the history of the galaxy. One day, translation software finished processing months of recorded sounds. She sat in her shelter for hours, reading through the results. The language was more complex than she had imagined. They had words for hundreds of different types of weather, dozens of different hunting strategies, and countless ways to express family bonds and pack relationships. But one entry made her freeze. The sound that the cubs made whenever she returned to camp, that desperate, joyful sound that had invented and the others had learned, had a direct translation now. Homebringer. It was not just a name, it was a title, an ancient title according to the linguistic patterns, one that they had not used in generations. It was given to the one who created safety where there was danger, the one who built warmth where there was cold, the one who turned a pack of survivors into a family. The cubs were not just happy to see her, they were honoring her with the highest title their culture had. Closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She thought about her life before the crash, the endless research papers, the long voyages through empty space, the professional relationships that never quite became friendships. She thought about all the years she had spent studying alien life forms from a distance, never truly connecting, never truly belonging. And she thought about this pack of deadly predators who had taken her in, protected her, loved her, who sang with her under strange stars, who let their children sleep in her arms, who called her homebringer because she had given them something that all beings in the galaxy needed. A home, a family, a place to belong. That night made a decision. She walked to her shelter, picked up the communication beacon and carried it outside, followed her making curious sounds. The other cubs trailed behind, and soon the adult came too, watching to see what their strange human pack member was doing. Set the beacon on a rock beside the stream. She looked at it for a long moment, this small device that could take her back to human space, back to her old life, back to everything she had known before. Then she looked at whose amber eyes reflected the moonlight like gold. She looked at, tilting her head with endless curiosity. She looked at, steady and strong and waiting for her decision. She pressed the button, but not to call for rescue. She pressed it to send a message, a data packet containing everything she had learned about their language, their intelligence, their culture, proof that they were not animals but people, proof that the Galactic Union had been wrong. When the message was sent, she turned off the beacon. She would not call for rescue. She would not leave. She had found something more valuable than anything human space could offer, and she was going to protect it with everything she had. Pressed against her legs and made her special sound. Homebringer. Yes, thought, resting her hand on the cub's silver-tipped head. That is exactly what I am. The ship came 3 weeks after sent her message. She was teaching the cubs how to weave baskets when she heard it, the deep roar of engines breaking through the atmosphere. All 4 cubs stopped what they were doing and looked up, their ears flattened against their heads. They had never heard such a sound before. His blood went cold. "Stay here," she said to the cubs, even though she knew they could not understand her words. She made the gesture for stay safe and ran toward the clearing. The ship was a Galactic Union patrol vessel, sleek and gray with the Union star symbol painted on its side. It landed in the middle of the clearing, crushing a carefully built fire pit beneath its metal feet. The engines whined as they powered down, and then a door opened in the ship's side. Marines came out first, 6 of them, wearing heavy armor and carrying weapons that could kill with a single shot. They spread out around the clearing, their helmets hiding their faces, their movements sharp and military. Then came the scientist. He was a middle-aged man with gray in his hair and kind eyes that did not match the situation. He wore the white coat of a Galactic Union and carried a tablet computer in his hands. When he saw dirty, thin, dressed in clothes she had repaired 100 times, his eyes went wide with shock. "Lieutenant Park," he asked. "Park, you're alive." "Yes," stood her ground even as the Marines moved around her. "Who are you?" "Doctor," the scientist said. "Union Xenobiology Division. We received your data packet 3 weeks ago. Command sent us to investigate and to rescue you." He looked around the clearing, at shelter and storage areas and the obvious signs of long-term habitation. "Though it seems you've done quite well at rescuing yourself." "I had help, did not move. Doctor, why did they send Marines?" The scientist's kind eyes became uncomfortable. "Your data packet was very interesting, Lieutenant. If what you say is true, if the really are sapient beings, it would change everything we know about this system. Command wants to verify your findings." "Verify how?" Doctor did not answer. He did not have to. One of the Marines was already talking into his communicator and heard words that made her heart stop. Specimens, containment, research facility. They had not come to verify. They had come to take. "No," the word came out of his mouth before she could think. "Absolutely not." The Marine commander, a woman with cold eyes and a face, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Park, you've been stranded on a Class 5 for 8 months. We understand you may have developed attachments to the local wildlife, but the Union has protocols for situations like this that will be treated humanely." "They're not wildlife," said. Her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. "They're people. They have language, they have culture, they have families. You can't just take them like they're animals. The Union will determine what they are." The commander's voice was flat. "Where is their den?" Said nothing. The commander nodded to her Marines. "Fan out. Find the creatures. Use non-lethal force to subdue the adults. Priority targets are any juveniles. Command wants young specimens for long-term study." The cubs, they wanted the cubs. Something broke inside, something that had been holding back a flood of rage and fear and protective fury. She stepped directly into the path of the nearest Marine. "You will not touch them." The Marine laughed. "Lady, get out of the way before you get hurt." I said no. The forest exploded, came out of the shadows like a living nightmare. His roar shook the trees and sent birds screaming into the sky. His massive body crashed through the undergrowth, his amber eyes burning with a fury that made the Marines stumble back in fear. Behind him came the rest of the pack, and the other 4 adults emerged from every direction, surrounding the clearing just as they had surrounded on her first night. But this time, there was no curiosity in their eyes. There was only the cold promise of death. The Marines raised their weapons. "Hold your fire," the commander shouted. "Hold your fire until I give the order." Moved without thinking, she ran to and stood in front of him, facing the Marines with her arms spread wide. The mastiff's breath was hot on the back of her neck, his growl vibrating through her body. "Listen to me," she said to the commander. "Listen carefully. These beings are not your enemies. They are not specimens. They are a sapient species who have been misclassified by the Union for decades, and I am one of them now. I am Pac." "You're human," the commander said. "I'm their home bringer." His voice rang through the clearing. "Their mother to the orphaned cubs, their family, and I will die before I let you take them." Silence fell over the clearing. The Marines held their weapons steady, but could see uncertainty in their eyes. They had been trained to fight animals, not to wage war on a human woman defending her family. Doctor stepped forward slowly. "Commander, maybe we should reconsider. Our orders are clear. Our orders are based on outdated classifications." The scientist held up his tablet. "I've been reviewing Lieutenant Park's data during our journey here. The evidence is overwhelming. The language has over 3,000 distinct words. They have burial rituals for their dead. They teach their young through structured play and observation. They sing, Commander. They make music." The commander hesitated. And then the cubs came. They should have stayed hidden. They should have obeyed gesture. But they were young and frightened, and they needed their home bringer. All 4 of them burst out of the undergrowth and ran straight to. Reached her first. The silver-tipped cub pressed against its legs and made her sound, that desperate, joyful, sacred sound that meant home and safety and love. Then Miso and enjoined her, all 4 cubs clustering around like she was the center of their universe. They were shaking with fear, but they had come anyway. They had come because she was their home bringer, and home bringers were supposed to make things safe. The adult went very still. They were waiting to see what the humans would do. Looked at the commander. She looked at the Marines with their deadly weapons. She looked at Doctor with his uncertain eyes. "You see them," she said softly. "You see how they love, you see how they trust. These are not animals. These are children who have lost their mother and found a new one. Are you really going to take them away? Are you really going to destroy everything they have?" The commander's hand tightened on her weapon. Then did something unexpected. The massive alpha male moved forward slowly, ignoring the weapons pointed at him. He approached Doctor, stopping just a meter away from the scientist. The amber eyes met the human eyes. And spoke. Not in words, mouths could not form human sounds. But he made the sound that had taught the cubs, the sound they made when welcoming pack members back to camp. The sound that meant, "You belong here. You are safe with us." He was offering peace. Doctor stared at the massive predator before him. This creature could kill him in an instant. Its claws could tear through his body like paper, but instead of attacking, it was welcoming him. It was treating him as a potential friend. "Commander," Doctor said, his voice shaking, "lower your weapons." "Doctor." "Lower them. Now." Doctor turned to face the military woman. "I am the senior scientific authority on this mission, and I am telling you that these beings are sapient. They are people, And what we were planning to do is no longer specimen collection. It's kidnapping. It's slavery. I will not be part of it, and I will not let you be part of it either." The commander held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she lowered her weapon. The Marines followed. Sneeze went weak with relief. She sank to the ground, and the cubs immediately piled onto her, making worried sounds and licking her face. She laughed and cried at the same time, holding them as tight as she could. Doctor approached her carefully, watched him but did not attack. "Lieutenant Park," the scientist said, "I need to file a new report with the Union, a complete reclassification of the as a sapient species. That will protect them from exploitation under galactic law." He paused. "But I need you to help me. I need everything you know about them. Their language, their customs, their social structures. Can you do that?" Looked up at him through her tears. "Yes, I can do that." "And after that, will you come home, back to human space?" She looked at who was pressed against her chest, still making her special sound. She looked at who had come to sit nearby, curiosity winning over fear. She looked at, steady and strong and waiting. "Doctor," she said, "I am home." 2 weeks later, the Union ship departed. It carried Doctor, the Marines, and a data package that would reshape galactic understanding of the forever. It did not carry Park. She stood in her clearing, watching the ship rise into the purple sky, surrounded by her pack, sat at her feet, pressed against her side, stood behind her like a mountain of fur and muscle. When the ship disappeared into the clouds, the adult raised their voices in a howl. It was a celebration, a victory cry, a declaration of survival. And then, one by one, they made a new sound. The sound the cubs had invented for. The sound that meant home and safety and belonging. Homebringer. All 6 adults made it now. The whole pack, calling her by the name she had earned. Closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She had crashed on and found life. She had been surrounded by predators and found family. She had been stranded alone and found home. She was Park, homebringer of 7, and she was exactly where she was meant to be.